this is Lainey Cameron. I am here today with Jen Craven. Jen, congratulations. This book just launched.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. It's been a great week. I'm only on day 2 post launch, but it's been wonderful.
And Best Years of Your Life is your third book. I'm actually fascinated to talk to you about this because you wrote historical fiction, your first two, and this is contemporary. But
hmm
before we go there, where are you joining me from today?
So I'm on my lovely screened in back porch, which is my favorite spot in the house. I do a lot of writing here, and I'm based in Northwest Pennsylvania. So what I always tell people is kind of in between Erie and Pittsburgh, so way on the western side of the state. Um, and yeah, it's my favorite spot and where I get a lot of creativity being out in the natural light.
It's beautiful. It looks lovely, the background there on the video. For
Thank
those who are
you.
on the audio, you'll just have to go check the video out on the website.
Yes, yes.
So let's talk about best years of your life. I am
Mhm.
fascinated to hear. Let's start with the story. So, for those who are not familiar, it takes place on a college campus. What's your short pitch? How do you describe the book to people?
So I would say that this is a classic women's fiction. So we're talking about the emotional journey of the female protagonists, and it's two mothers and their teenage daughter. And like Lainey said, set on a fictional college campus with the professor moms and the daughter who goes to school there. And really, kind of all of the things that happen to these three women over the course of an academic year, where they're each harboring different secrets and they make some questionable decisions really in the name of what I think of as identity and love and affection. And so it's really kind of about choices that are made and the aftermath that happens.
And one of the things I love is how you can take a theme of a book, right? And you can write it multiple different ways. And so, one of the things I thought was fascinating looking at the first reviews that have come in for this book is people are calling it almost suspense like in the way they
Yes,
describe the book, which is fascinating to me.
I know. And I think that's also so interesting as well, because I definitely would never have pitched this as a suspense book. But I do understand that there are some elements of it more from like an emotional sort of suspense. So there's certainly no like killer about to jump out of the closet kind of suspense, but it's really just like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to this character sort of suspense. And that's the kind of stuff
Yeah,
that I love to read. And so I think it kind of keeps the pages turning when there's, cliffhangers at the end of each chapter.
completely agree. And I just pulled some of the stuff from your reviews to give people a sense. And here's the most common things that are being said: things like, it gripped me, I pulled an all nighter, secrets, fast and exciting. So it's amazing you managed to write a really fast paced, kind of grips you and pulls you in women's fiction, which again, I love those books. My goal is to write that kind of fiction too. So I'm
hmm
excited to get my hands on this one now it's out in the world. So I think it's fascinating that you managed to write a women's fiction novel that is so gripping and page turning in this way.
Yeah, I really tried to blend character driven and plot driven together and not really focus on one or the other, really just trying to make a story that, the pages keep turning, there's things happening, and there's a lot of, some twists along the way, but also really diving into the characters to understand why the characters are making the decisions they are. So I feel like it's very relatable, even though, you might think to yourself, oh my gosh, I would never do what this character did. But you can understand the reasoning, and it pulls at those like human emotions. So I just tried to kind of blend both.
And one of the things I read is that it really deals with moral dilemmas. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what are the moral dilemmas
Yeah.
that the characters are facing?
So I'm super fascinated with basically ethics, I guess you could say, and how people basically have choices in their lives, and those choices come with consequences. So I think there's good people out there that make bad decisions sometimes. And then it's sort of like they have to wrestle with, what happens afterwards. So my main protagonist is a professor, and she's in her early 50s. And she ends up sort of forming a friendship, which then turns to a relationship with a student. And so that's sort of like one of the hallmark no-nos of professorhood, and so she has to kind of deal with that. And then it spirals a bit, and she, puts a lot of things on the line, such as she's up for tenure and those sorts of things. And then the daughter, who's another character, is an outcast, and she really wants to get in with the cool crowd. And so she befriends the most popular girl on campus, but there's some strings attached. And the popular girl wants her to steal exams from her mother's computer. So she gets wrapped up in a, college cheating scandal. And so there's a lot of sort of scandals going on with parallel plot lines with the mother-daughter.
Oh, fascinating. And I saw that one of the things it said in your book club questions is that
Mhm.
it's almost a coming of age, but you've got characters in their 50s who are
Yeah.
dealing with kind of some of these dilemmas and going through this personal growth. And I thought that was really interesting to write a coming of age. Tell me more about that.
Well, I think most people would consider coming of age novels mostly in that either the YA category, or even if it is an adult book, they have characters who are, right on that cusp of adulthood. So leaving the teenage years, entering their 20s, perhaps. And for me, I really thought, you know what? I feel like people can have coming of age moments all through their lives. And so it's really just learning and navigating identity, maybe perhaps when a person is switching careers or has some sort of life altering medical thing happen to them, which is what happens to one of my characters. So it's really sort of like, okay, here's the person I thought I was at this stage of my life, and oh, maybe not, maybe I'm pivoting and now I'm going to become this person for reasons that are either in or out of their control.
Well, let me read a quick review, and this is from Nicole Mayer, the author of the Second Chance Supper Club.
Yes.
Fabulous book, fabulous writer. She says fans of suspense, going back to the suspense theme, will want to pull an all-nighter with Jen Craven's newest release, set against the backdrop of a small-town university. Best Years of Your Life includes a cast of engaging characters who must negotiate good decisions after bad and learn the value of family, love, and loyalty in exchange. That
Yes.
sums it up nicely.
One of the things that I loved playing on, alliteration was saying that this book really touches on lust versus loyalty and dignity versus desire.
Ooh, I like.
Yes, I love those two things paired against each other.
So, what was the inspiration for setting it on a college campus, for moral dilemmas? Like, where did all this
Mhm.
come from?
So I actually spent over a decade as a college instructor. I worked at a small university close to my home. Actually, it's my alma mater where I graduated, Mercyhurst University. And so I just love campus settings in real life. I love, being on campus or walking through a campus, but I love reading books that are set on campuses or boarding schools. I just think there's like a cool feeling to it. It's that whole setting and the atmosphere. Plus there's always drama. There's always drama at school, right? So whether it's the students, the popular versus the non-popular, all of those sort of, power struggles, the faculty versus the students, or struggles within the faculty. I just find it very fascinating. So coming from a teaching background and experiencing those sorts of things firsthand, I really drew a lot of inspiration from my time in academia. And while the exact plot line is certainly nothing that I encountered firsthand, I'm sure that those sorts of stories exist out there in the world somewhere, so it
Yeah,
couldn't have been too far of a stretch. We see news headlines, so that's really where I got some of the ideas.
that's awesome. Well, I said I'd ask about the idea that you've written historical fiction and now this is contemporary. And I always like to ask about the process of writing a book. And I'm fascinated. Is it different writing historical versus contemporary in terms of how you approached it, in terms of how you edited the book?
I think, well, you have to do research no matter what type of book you're writing, of course. But I think with historical, there's probably a little bit more weight to the research side of things, especially if you're basing it in a real time period and a real setting. I made up sort of a fictional campus and placed it in Virginia because I'm sort of familiar. I'm in Pennsylvania, so I wanted it somewhere near where I was familiar. But I do think that there's that kind of research component that's different with historical.
And what about editing? What did this look like for you? Did this book kind of come out fully formed? Did it have to have lots of revisions? Like anything people might be surprised to hear changed from the original versions?
Well, I wrote the first draft fairly quickly. I would say I had a full first draft within 6 weeks. It just poured out of me. I was just like so into the story. And I had pretty much the beginning to the end in my head from the get go. I kind of knew exactly how I wanted to start and end. As far as changes, I would say a couple characters changed a little bit. I don't want to give spoilers away. There was a slightly different ending where I deleted a last maybe half of a chapter where I thought I was going to end it on more of like a cliffhanger type thing. And some of my readers thought that seemed almost like too much suspense, almost like there was going to be a sequel, which there's not. It's a standalone novel. And so I'm very happy with how it ends now. But yeah, I think just like tweaking characters and making sure they're fully fleshed out. But really, I had pretty much the whole thing in my head from the get go.
That's awesome. And so, what have you learned? This is your third book. It's getting great reviews. Like, what have you learned along the way to share with other writers about the process, the life?
Yeah.
Like, what wisdom do you have to share?
Well, honestly, I would say one of my biggest pieces of advice is to just really follow your gut in terms of your choices that you're making with publishing, with writing, and all of that. It's great to, be involved in the community and look and listen to other people's stories, but you ultimately have to do what's best for you. So when I first finished this book, and once it was completely reviewed, edited, solid, ready to go, I did query agents, and I thought I was going to go the traditional route for a long time. And I had good success with agents. It was with the manuscript was out with several in full. And the whole time, just like my gut was telling me it wasn't the right choice for me. I don't think there's anything wrong with traditional publishing, of course, but it just didn't feel like the right path for me at this time for this book. So I ended up withdrawing all of those and just went indie and went full force. And I've been very happy with my decision. And who knows what the future holds. I could very well query a new book, down the road. But I think it's just important to not get too caught up in the should do's in the industry or what you think is the right choice or a better choice, and really do what's best for you.
I love that you brought up that this is an indie book, because our goal here on the podcast is to showcase the best in women's fiction. And I do that by picking authors who are really engaged with the community, which I know that you are as well,
Yes.
who I know have really quality books that readers are loving. And I don't lead with publisher as one of the things that I look at primarily as a way to know whether someone fits in this category of being among the best of women's
Right.
fiction. But it is hard, right? When you're an indie, I think it's especially hard to put that mark of quality out there, to show that
Yes.
you've treated this as a quality product, that you didn't just, write a second draft and fling it out into the world, which some people have that inaccurate perception, because there are some books out there, right? It's an open playing field.
Yes.
So how did you know, two questions for this. How did you know that the agent publisher path wasn't the right path for you? Because I think a lot of people who listen to this are very interested in this choice of publisher question.
Yeah, I think again, it was totally a personal choice, and I have tons of friends who are still querying and traditionally published, and that's wonderful for them, and I'm their biggest cheerleaders. For me, I think it just came down to control and the idea that I knew that if I kept everything in my control, I'd be able to put out the material and the content that I want on my timeline, you know, with my ideas, my cover, all of those sorts of things. And so it was more of just like having that certainty where there's a lot of uncertainty in traditional publishing. And plus the timeline, it's no secret that traditional publishing is very slow moving. And, I just kind of really wanted to get this out there. I was ready for it. So to me, that was my best choice for this particular book. But back to your point about the podcast, I think that's such another reason why I reached out to you guys, and I just love listening, is because you do focus and highlight on so many types of books that are coming from so many different paths. And I think that's so great, because sometimes we get bombarded with just all of the big name books that are out there. And there's so many other great ones that slip through the cracks because they might not just have been given the chance, to be seen. And so I think really readers at the end of the day don't really care where a book comes from as long as it's a good book.
And that was going to be my second question. I know this is a great quality book. I haven't had a chance to read it myself, but I'm already hearing about it from people I respect. So
Mm-hmm.
how did you go through the process of making sure it was quality? Like, I'm just asking this question as much for some writers who listen to this who may be thinking, I'm going to self-pub, and I know you did this the right way. So did you hire a copy editor? Like, what did that look like?
Sure. So I definitely did a lot of self-editing. And once I felt like I got it to a good point, just, what I could do with it, reached out to some very trusted beta readers that have, that I've been, working with, or we've collaborated for, a couple years now, who I really respect. And I know that they'll be honest with me. Lots of honest feedback. You have to be willing to take the constructive criticism. One of my betas in particular, she's brutal. And it's sort of like, oh, and for a second you're like, oh my gosh, but when you can sit back and objectively look at the feedback and say, you know what, they're right. And feedback is subjective, so you certainly can take or leave what you want. But I think when multiple people are saying the same things, then you know that it's maybe something that you should consider, editing or changing, revising. So after betas, I had critique partners, all of that, but I did hire a developmental editor. So she was able to go through and really, from a big picture, say, okay, this is what's working. And she's trained to spot things like flow and plot holes and just making sure that it was going to be quality. Because I think
Yeah.
if you're going to indie publish, you have to invest in editing.
And for those like readers who are listening going, what's the difference? What's a developmental editor versus a copy editor? A
Yeah.
developmental editor is a story editor. They're going to help you make sure to your book that it really is a page turner, that it keeps people engaged, that the story is working, versus a
Right.
copy editor is going to be down at the language level of the book.
Yes. And looking for typos. And I'm thankful to like my final arc readers who were still texting me like, oh, caught a typo here, because gosh darn, those things just slip right through.
Yeah. Well, obviously it paid off because people are loving this book already.
Thank
So
you.
I always like to ask authors I admire, what are you enjoying reading, or can you recommend anything to the listeners here?
So the two that I was going to mention today, one is I just earlier this month finished reading Anne Patchett's essay collection, so These Precious Days. And I have to say that this was the first time I had ever read short stories or an essay collection. It's not something I typically gravitate towards. I'm much more of like a novel reader. But wow, this book is very good. And I mean, let's not be surprised. It's Anne Patchett, right? So I would
Right.
highly recommend that. And it's really, what I loved is that they're short, so you can just read one before bed each night. Like, I know a lot of people say, oh, reading puts me to sleep, or I don't have time. When you're reading something in smaller chunks, then you feel like you can finish it, a couple pages. So that's one I would suggest. And then just this morning, I finished on audio Jeanette McCurdy's new memoir, which is I'm Glad My Mom Is Dead, which has a very shocking title, and it might turn some people off, but it was very well done. And even if you don't know her as an actress, if you didn't grow up, watching her on Nickelodeon, I don't think that matters, because I did not, and I could still appreciate the memoir. It was very haunting and just, very, very good.
I have heard great things about that book. I mean, obviously Anne Pratchett, who doesn't love Anne Pratchett, but in particular, the memoir you're talking about, I'm hearing it everywhere. I think 5 people have recommended it to me now. So obviously it's creating a lot of
Yes.
like word of mouth recommendations.
Yes, and I listened to it on audio, and Jeanette McCurdy is the narrator. So I think I love that even more when a memoir is
Oh,
done
yeah.
by the author. And so really just hearing it in her voice, what made it extra, extra good.
Well, now that your book is out in the world, which is so exciting, is there anything you're hearing from your readers or your beta readers, or just as it's out there, that's been surprising or delightful to you?
I just love when a reader will message me and say, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming, or oh, I just got to XYZ point and, I had to reach out to you, or something like that. When some of my friends were reading an earlier draft, they called them gasp moments, where they were sort of like, oh, I got to another gasp moment, and so that's always kind of fun, because that it's creating enjoyment, that it's something that they're enjoying reading.
Exactly, exactly. Well, before we wrap up, is there anything I haven't asked you that you like to talk about relative to writing or relative to this book?
I don't think so. I'm just so excited for it to be out there. I'm so excited for readers to get their hands on it. It's a quick read. It's, great escapism and perfect timing with back to school, since it's set on a campus. So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to suggest to folks that are listening, readers that are listening, that it sounds to me like this would make a great book club book, because you've got those themes of temptation, moral dilemmas, characters of different age. It seems
Yes.
to me it would be a phenomenal have a glass of wine and talk about those things with your book club kind of book.
Yes, I've had a few reviews saying like this is right up a book club's alley. And I'm also so happy to zoom in with book clubs. They can reach out on my website or Instagram. I would love to meet up with people virtually and chit chat about the book.
Awesome. And that's always my last question. Where do you hang out in social media world? Where's the best place for folks to follow you and interact with you?
The best place to find me is Instagram. That's where I'm most active. I'm trying to dip my toe into TikTok, even though it feels like a whole new world. But I'm there a little bit, Facebook a little bit as well, but Instagram is definitely my primary hangout.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and congratulations on the book's release.
Thank you so much, Lainey. This was so fun.